Good afternoon. Today is the 31st of January and we've already recorded one video today where I almost got killed trying to join the M3 by a Waitrose van. Let's see if when we do this video that we can't keep things a little bit calmer. So this is yet another very vague, not particularly interesting and probably quite boring vlog. The subject that we're going to be discussing today, as I sort of run around, which is doing some errands, partly for my mother, partly for myself, is a very interesting topic actually. When does a car become a classic? This is actually something that you can't really give a definite answer about. For example, if I take this car to a lot of shows, it's 20 years old, actually 20 years old in March this year, I can just turn up in this and a lot of shows just let me in because it's a Rover, and because it's a bit of an unusual Rover. It's a Rover with a V6 engine, whereas most of these were 4 cylinders. So it's a bit unusual, because it's a Rover, long defunct company, no problem, just let you in. However, if I was to turn up in a high specification Mark IV Golf, for example, from this era, I don't think people would just let me in. I mean, we're not talking about the R32 or anything like that, we're talking about something a bit more modest, maybe, I don't know, a 5-cylinder one or something like that. So, you know, those are interesting. It just wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same at all. You couldn't just rock up to a lot of shows and say, hello, here I am, a Mark IV Golf. So like, it's a Mark IV Golf, you know, go to the modern car parking. And also it doesn't necessarily mean that when a car's a classic, but it's particularly valuable. You all know how much I paid for my Volvo C70, and that's a car that's 25 years old in April. I'd say most people would probably think of that as a bit of a classics, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be worth lots of money if it is. So really this is kind of open to a lot of interpretation. It's open to really sort of what your opinion is and what circles you move in. Some cars are very old, but they don't really seem to have classic status in most people's eyes. The Highlight Pony was a 1991 that I filmed last year on the channel. Most people don't even know what they are, and they're not worth a lot of money despite being, in that case, over 30 years old. In the 1990s there was a television show, and I can't remember what name it was, where they had a princess, you know, one made by British Airland, and somebody tried to convince people that the princess, I think it was about 20 years old at the time, was a classic or would be a classic, and a lot of people just laughed at it. So the Brown Princess, when he got it valued at £150. And these days that's probably very close to 500, I don't know, inflation, who knows. But that car is now a classic, it absolutely is. I drove an almost identical one last year, and that car's probably worth close to £10,000. Something like that. I don't know exactly, they're not exactly common or anything. But yeah, brown princess, bronze princess really, with a chocolate brown vinyl roof and a chocolate brown velour interior. Who would have thought it? Allegros and Marinas were sort of the same for a long time. Nobody wanted to think that they would ever become classics, but they have become classics. Obviously we're talking an awful lot longer, we're talking almost 50 years or more for those, you know, older than the Hyundai Pony, but they actually have started to command sort of decent sums of money. You can't buy an Allegro or Marina really for low budget reviews money anymore. You can't. You could for a long time, but you can't now. It's funny how things have changed. Certainly like an E39 M5 BMW, a lot of people would say that is a classic. It's an M5. But even the next M5 after that, some people say is a classic. It's a really, really strange idea. There's also like a sort of unknown hierarchy with these things. So take that example of that Mark 4 Golf again and a Rover 75 say. They were both launched at pretty much the same time. The Golf was discontinued about 2004 or 2006, I think, some of the States, and the 75 went up in 2005. So almost the same production run. You take a 75 to a show, everybody think that's a classic. Even like C75s on the road, they'll start taking photographs and say, "Oh, it's been a long time since I've seen one of those," and that kind of thing. That's okay. I've driven 75s. They were sort of, you know, almost in a way old before their time. But what makes it the fact that, you know, you turn up in your 75 to a show and I was like, ooh, isn't that nice? And a Mark 4 Golf, wouldn't a Passat, this is a Passat at the time, you know, nobody cares. Nobody cares. I mean, W8 Passat, yeah, but anything else, and bear in mind they're the same age, they don't care. Lloyd Vehicle Consulting stickers, t-shirts and mugs are available by clicking the link to the Google form in the video description below. Right, that's the first lot done. It's interesting to look back on what people thought classic cars were perhaps a long time ago. In 1983, I've seen a photograph of a classic car show, I can't remember where it was, but there was a 70s MGB in there. 1983 being 40 years ago, and the MGB being in production from 1962 to 1980, although there were actually some examples registered into 1983. There's one of them in a classic car club that my lady wife and I belong to here in Hampshire, Test Road Motor Review. There was an 83 on a Y. So even then, a car that's up to 21 years old and no more was being seen as sort of like a classic. Will that be the case for cars these days? I don't know. Plastic car insurance often doesn't cover cars that are under 25 years old, and sometimes they won't even cover cars that are sort of getting on for 30 years old. I've had that experience myself. So what exactly is a classic car? Is it due to age? Is it due to value? There's a lot of debate at the moment about the fate of, you know, the really old stuff. We're talking, you know, 1930s cars, 1920s cars. There's plenty of those in the Test Road Motor Enthusiast, but the owners tend to be, you know, maybe in their 70s or 80s. A lot of younger people just aren't really interested in that kind of stuff. I mean, I myself, I can't ever see myself owning a car from that far back. A lot of the 50s stuff I wouldn't particularly want to have a go in either. It's just a bit too difficult, you know. It's not really the days of disc brakes or, you know, all synchromatic gearboxes or brake servos and things like that. A lot of the cars from the 50s don't have that kind of stuff, so it just makes it a bit more difficult to own. I myself am much more interested in cars from perhaps, you know, in terms of actually a proposition for someone like me to drive on a more frequent basis. I'm really only interested in stuff from sort of late 70s onwards, really. Other stuff I think is great. I have driven stuff that's much older than that. The oldest car I drove was a 1961 Rover P4, and it was fun, but it didn't have an all-synchromesh gearbox, and the steering was really heavy. Brakes were pretty good. That was fine. The gearbox is very strange as well, because, you know, in that car, first is where sort of third should be, reverse is where first should be, and it's often the case on older cars that are like that. So it just makes them a bit more difficult to get used to, and you know, the parts issue can be there as well for some of these. So it's not necessarily that they're particularly valuable. You can pick up a decent P4 for under £5,000. P6 is a bit more advanced. It's kind of 2 generations on in Rover's history, so you know, you can pick one of those up for about the same kind of money. In fact, I know quite a few people who own them. Mr. Richard Furious Driver's got one. Steve Denton, who's a specialist MG and Triumph mechanic, and has his own YouTube channel. He's got a P6. It's very nice. I've seen it. No one would dispute something like that's a classic. Nobody would, but I'm sure a few years ago, but people sort of didn't. It seems to me that this sort of definition of what a classic car is, it can be somewhat elastic. I don't think anybody can give you a definite answer to that question. Well, when something becomes a classic, what qualifies it as? Why is this Rover seen as a classic by many people and the equivalent Mark IV Golf not? Why is that? It's an interesting question. Anyway, thank you ever so much indeed once again for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's going to be a comment below, and we shall see you again soon for more probably quite boring and irrelevant musing.